The mafia boss broke his own code when he fell for the woman who tried to assassinate him. The rain in Harborview did not wash away the sins of the city. It only made the neon lights of the district bleed across the pavement, creating a kaleidoscope of red and blue reflections that danced over the puddles. From the penthouse office of Club Vento, Adrian Costa looked down at the street below. He stood perfectly still, a glass of amber whiskey held loosely in one hand, his bespoke suit hugging a frame built from years of violence and discipline. Adrian was the king of this concrete jungle, but he ruled with a specific philosophy. In a world of chaos, he was the architect of order. The Costa Syndicate was not a pack of rabid dogs, it was a machine. He had a code, etched into his very bones, a set of laws that separated him from the savages in the Iron Bridge cartel across town. Family was sacred, innocents were off limits, women and children were never to be touched. But the final tenet of his code was the one that kept him alive. If you raise a weapon against the king, you do not leave the room breathing. There were no exceptions. Mercy to a traitor was a death sentence for oneself. Marco, his lieutenant and oldest friend, stepped into the room. The heavy oak door clicked shut, muffling the thrumming bass from the nightclub 3 floors down. "Everything is quiet tonight, boss," Marco said, pouring himself a drink. The shipment from the docks cleared customs without a hitch. Adrian turned, his face unreadable. He had the kind of handsome features that looked carved from granite, sharp and cold, softened only by eyes that saw too much. "Good. Keep the perimeter tight. I have a feeling the air is shifting." Marco laughed. "A rough sound. You always say that before a storm." "Because I am usually right," Adrian replied, turning back to the window. Blocks away, in a cramped, mildew-scented apartment that smelled of stale coffee and fear, Riley Shaw stared at her reflection in a cracked mirror. She did not recognize the woman looking back. Her blonde hair, usually tied back in a severe, practical knot, was loose and curled in soft waves. Her face was painted with makeup that highlighted her cheekbones and darkened her eyes, masking the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones. She wore a cocktail waitress uniform that was 2 sizes too small, the fabric clinging to her skin like a second layer of guilt. She was not a killer. She was a protector. She'd spent 6 years in the military as a sharpshooter, looking through a scope to save her squad, to stop threats before they could start. She was trained to disarm, to de-escalate, to survive, but tonight she had to be an executioner. Her hand trembled as she reached for the small, suppressed pistol on the dresser. She strapped it high onto her thigh, securing it beneath the hem of the short dress. It felt heavy, a cold weight against her warm skin. "Do it for Noah," she whispered to the empty room. The image of her brother flashed in her mind. Noah, with his messy hair and easy laugh, now bound and terrified in some godforsaken warehouse belonging to the Iron Bridge cartel. They had taken him 3 days ago. The demands were simple. Kill Adrian Costa, the head of the rival family, and Noah walks free. Fail or refuse, and they would send him back to her in pieces. Riley had spent the last 2 weeks stalking Adrian Costa. She knew his schedule better than she knew her own. She knew he arrived at Club Vento at 10 o'clock sharp. She knew he drank whiskey. Neat. She knew he checked the exits before he relaxed, but she had also seen things that made her stomach churn with doubt. She had watched him from the shadows of a parking garage as he helped his elderly mother into a car, his hand gentle on her elbow, his smile rare and unguarded. She had seen him laugh with Marco outside a bakery, looking less like a monster and more like a man carrying the weight of the world. He did not move like the sadists in Iron Bridge. He moved like a soldier. But Noah was the only thing that mattered. Riley swallowed the bile rising in her throat, grabbed her coat, and walked out into the rain. Club Vento was an assault on the senses. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, sweat, and ozone. Electronic music pounded against the walls, a rhythmic heartbeat that vibrated in Riley's teeth. She moved through the crowd with a tray of empty glasses, her head down, blending into the background. She was a ghost in the machine, invisible to the men who ogled the staff and the women who laughed too loudly. She spotted him immediately. Adrian was in the VIP section, a raised platform cordoned off by velvet ropes and 2 mountainous bodyguards. He was sitting in a semicircular leather booth, flanked by Marco and 3 other associates. He looked relaxed, one arm draped over the back of the seat, but Riley noticed his eyes. They were constantly moving, scanning the room, analyzing threats. He was a predator at rest. Riley's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had to get close. The plan was to wait for him to move toward the private corridor that led to the back offices. It was the only blind spot in the club's security grid, a narrow hallway where the cameras had a 3-second delay as they panned. She waited. Minutes felt like hours. Every time a laugh erupted from the booth, she flinched. Finally, Adrian stood up. He said something to Marco, who nodded, and then he turned toward the rear exit, moving with that fluid, dangerous grace she had studied for weeks. Now, Riley ditched the tray on a passing table and slipped through the crowd. Intercepting his path, she timed it perfectly, falling in step behind a group of loud patrons to mask her approach. As Adrian turned the corner into the dimly lit corridor, the noise of the club faded slightly, muffled by the heavy curtains. It was just the 2 of them for a brief second. Riley reached under her dress, her fingers closing around the grip of the pistol. The metal was warm from her body heat. She drew the weapon. Her movement practiced and efficient, but her soul revolted. She was 5 feet away, 3 feet. She raised the gun, aiming for the center of his back, right between the shoulder blades. "Do it," she screamed internally. "Pull the trigger." But she hesitated. It was a fraction of a second, a microscopic pause born of a conscience she thought she had buried. In that silence, the air shifted. Adrian Costa did not need to see a threat to know it was there. He felt the disturbance in the air, the change in pressure, the scent of fear that radiated off her. He spun around with a speed that defied physics. Before Riley could correct her aim, Adrian's hand shot out, clamping around her wrist like a steel vice. The force was immense. He twisted her arm up and away, and the pistol clattered uselessly to the tiled floor. In one fluid motion, he slammed her back against the wall. The air left her lungs in a sharp gasp. He pinned her there, his body pressing hers into the hard surface, his forearm braced against her collarbone, effectively trapping her. For a heartbeat, time suspended. Riley looked up, her chest heaving, her eyes wide and wild with panic. She expected to see rage. She expected the blank stare of a killer. Instead, she found herself locked in a gaze that was terrifyingly calm. Adrian's eyes were dark, almost black in the low light, and they bored into hers with a surgical precision. He was not looking at her like a victim. He was analyzing her. He took in the dilation of her pupils, the sweat on her brow, the way she wasn't fighting like a brawler but standing like a soldier who had lost her weapon. He saw the fear, but he also noted that she had not fired when she had the chance. "Who are you?" His voice was a low rumble, vibrating against her chest. Riley grit her teeth, refusing to speak. Her training kicked in. Name, rank, serial number. Give them nothing. Adrian didn't wait for an answer. He kicked the gun away, sending it sliding down the hall, and signaled to the shadows. 2 of his security team materialized from the gloom, their weapons drawn. "Grab her," Adrian commanded, stepping back but keeping his eyes locked on Riley. "Bring her to the back." The men seized Riley by the arms, their grip bruising. She did not struggle. There was no point. She had failed. Noah was dead. The thought made her knees weak, and she stumbled as they dragged her through a hidden door and into the soundproof inner sanctum of the club. The office was stark, modern and terrifyingly silent. The music from outside was gone, replaced by the hum of the air conditioning. The men shoved Riley into a straight-backed chair in the center of the room. One of them moved to zip-tie her hands behind her back, the plastic biting into her skin. Adrian walked to his desk and leaned against the edge of it, crossing his arms. He looked immaculate, untouched by the violence that had just occurred, save for the intense focus in his eyes. "Leave us," he said. "Boss, are you sure?" Marco asked, stepping into the room with a worried frown. She was armed, "She is secured," Adrian said, his voice flat. "Leave." Marco hesitated, then nodded at the guards. They filed out, leaving Riley alone with the man she had been sent to kill. Adrian watched her for a long moment. He studied the way she held her head high. Despite the situation, she was terrified. He could smell it, but she possessed a dignity that was out of place for a common hitman. "You have excellent form," Adrian said quietly. "You approached from my blind spot. You masked your footsteps. You are not a street thug. Who trained you?" Riley stared at a point on the wall over his shoulder. Silence. Adrian pushed off the desk and walked toward her. He moved slowly, deliberately. "I do not have patience for games tonight. You brought a weapon into my house. You put a gun to my back. Do you know what the punishment for that is?" Riley's jaw clenched so hard it ached. She knew. Everyone in Harborview knew. "Who sent you?" Adrian asked, stopping just a foot away from her. Was it the police, the feds, or was it Victor Hale? At the mention of the Ironbridge leader's name, Riley flinched. It was microscopic, a tiny tightening of the eyes, but Adrian caught it. "Ah," he said softly. "Ironbridge. I should have known. Victor does not have the courage to face me himself, so he sends a woman to do his dirty work." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Riley flinched away, expecting a blow. Instead, Adrian gripped her chin, his fingers strong and warm, forcing her to look at him. "Look at me," he commanded. Riley met his gaze. Up close. He was even more intimidating. There was an intensity in him that burned. "Why did you hesitate?" Adrian asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You had the shot. You could have put a bullet in my spine before I turned around. Why am I still breathing?" Riley's lips parted, but no sound came out. She couldn't tell him. If she told him, he would know about Noah, and if he knew about Noah, he might use him too. Adrian released her chin and sighed, a sound of disappointment. "You are loyal. That is admirable. Usually, but tonight, it is going to get you killed." He walked back to his desk and opened a drawer. When he turned back around, he was holding a heavy silver handgun. He checked the chamber with a mechanical efficiency that made Riley's blood run cold. He walked back to her, raising the weapon. The barrel was dark and infinite. "I have a code," Adrian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I do not hurt innocents. I do not hurt those who cannot defend themselves. But you are not innocent. You are an assassin, and I never spare a traitor." He leveled the gun at her forehead. Riley squeezed her eyes shut. She could feel the cold proximity of death. She thought of Noah, alone in the dark, waiting for a sister who would never come. She had failed him. She had failed everyone. "Any last words?" Adrian asked. The tears finally leaked out, hot and stinging against her cheeks. The soldier in her died, leaving only the sister. "If you kill me," she rasped, her voice hoarse and broken, "they will kill my brother." The room went silent. The finger on the trigger froze. Adrian stood there, the gun still aimed at her head, but the certainty had vanished from his posture. The words hung in the air, raw and desperate. "They will kill my brother." It wasn't a beg for her own life. She wasn't pleading for mercy for herself. She was bargaining for someone else. Adrian stared at the woman, no, the girl, shaking in his chair. He saw the way her body was curled in on itself, not in cowardice, but in agony. He remembered the hesitation in the hallway. She hadn't wanted to kill him. She had been forced. A memory surfaced in Adrian's mind, unbidden. A memory of himself, 15 years old, standing between his mother and a man with a knife, shaking but refusing to move, the things people did for blood, the things people did for family. His code was clear. Kill the assassin. It was simple. It kept him safe. But looking at Riley, seeing the utter devastation in her wet eyes as she opened them to face her death, Adrian felt a crack form in the foundation of his world. If he pulled the trigger, he wasn't executing an enemy, he was killing a victim, and that violated the core of who he believed himself to be. Slowly, agonizingly, Adrian lowered the gun. Riley let out a sob, her entire body sagging against the restraints. She gasped for air, her chest heaving, waiting for the trick, waiting for the bullet to come from somewhere else. Adrian stared at the gun in his hand as if it were a foreign object. He had just broken his own rule. He had shown weakness, and yet, looking at her, he knew he couldn't have done it. He walked to the door and threw it open. "Marco!" he barked. Marco appeared instantly, looking at the gun in Adrian's hand and then at the living woman in the chair. "Boss, is it done?" "No," Adrian said, his voice rough. "Get the car. The unmarked SUV." Marco blinked, confused. "Where are we taking her? The pier? No," Adrian said, holstering his weapon. "We are taking her to the safe house on 4th Street. "The safe house?" Marco lowered his voice to a hiss. "Adrian, she tried to put a hole in you. The crew will talk. If you let her live." "I said take her to the safe house," Adrian roared, the sudden fury making Marco recoil. "Put her in the back. Heavy guard. No one speaks to her. No one touches her. If she has a bruise on her by morning, I will skin the man responsible." Marco nodded slowly, sensing that arguing was dangerous. "Understood. Boss." 2 guards entered, cutting Riley's zip ties only to replace them with handcuffs. They hauled her up. Riley's legs were like jelly. She looked at Adrian, confusion warring with the terror in her face. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Adrian did not look at her. He turned his back, staring at the blank wall of his office, his reflection ghosting against the paint. "Get her out of my sight," he ordered. As they dragged her out, Adrian remained motionless. He listened to the footsteps fade down the hallway. He reached for the glass of whiskey on his desk and downed it in one burn. But it did nothing to settle the unease coiling in his gut. He had spared her. He had let a killer walk out of his office alive. He told himself it was because she was useful. He told himself he needed to know who held her brother so he could strike at Ironbridge. He told himself it was strategy. But as he closed his eyes, he saw the look in hers again. That wild, trapped terror. It didn't look like guilt. It looked like a mirror. Adrian Costa had broken his code, and as he stood alone in the silence of his empire, he had a terrifying feeling that this was only the beginning of the end. The cold steel of the handcuffs biting into her wrists was the first thing Riley Shaw felt when consciousness clawed its way back. She blinked, her vision swimming in the harsh, fluorescent light of a room she did not recognize. It was not a cell. Not exactly. It was a bedroom, stripped bare of anything personal, smelling of bleach and industrial cleaner. The windows were boarded up from the inside, leaving no view of the outside world, no hint of where in Harborview she had been taken. She tugged at her restraints. Her right wrist was cuffed to the heavy metal frame of the bed. There was just enough slack to sit up, but not enough to stand or reach the door. Panic flared, hot and sharp, but she forced it down. She was a soldier. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. She took a deep breath, assessing her body. Her head throbbed, likely from whatever sedative they had used to transport her, but she was intact. No broken bones, no fresh wounds. The lock on the heavy steel door clicked. Riley stiffened, her back pressing against the wall as the door swung open. Adrian Costa walked in. He looked exactly as he had in the club, impeccable suit, dark hair perfectly styled, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the small room. But the air around him had changed. In the club, he had been a king holding court, here, in this concrete box. He was the executioner coming to read the verdict. 2 large men flanked him, their hands hovering near the weapons beneath their jackets. Adrian held up a hand, a sharp, cutting motion. "Wait outside," he ordered. The men hesitated. "Boss, she is trained." One of them rumbled. "She's handcuffed to a bed frame bolted to the concrete," Adrian replied, his voice devoid of warmth. "If I cannot handle her, I do not deserve to lead this family. Get out!" The men retreated, closing the door with a heavy thud that echoed in Riley's chest. Adrian pulled a metal folding chair from the corner and set it down in the center of the room, just out of her reach. He sat, crossing one leg over the other, and watched her. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He was not shouting. He was not brandishing a weapon. He was simply existing, his dark eyes dissecting her layer by layer. "You slept for 12 hours, Adrian said finally, His tone was conversational, which made it terrifying. Most people in your position do not sleep. They pace. They cry. You slept like the dead. Riley lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. Exhaustion is a tool. If I am going to die, I might as well be rested. Adrian tilted his head. You expect to die? I tried to kill a mafia boss in his own club, Riley said, her voice raspy. I know the rules. You have a code. I do. Adrian agreed softly. And you broke the sanctity of my home. But you are still breathing. Do you know why? Riley remained silent. She knew why, or she hoped she did. Because she had hesitated. Because she had mentioned Noah. Adrian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The movement brought him closer, his scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco invading her space. I ran your prints, he said. Riley Shaw, former sergeant, honorable discharge, marksman citations. You fell off the grid 2 years ago, bouncing between private security gigs that pay less than minimum wage. You have no criminal record. You are a ghost. He paused, letting the information hang in the air. Why does a decorated soldier become a hired gun for scum like the Iron Bridge cartel? Riley looked away, staring at the blank wall. I do not have to tell you anything. Adrian stood up abruptly. The chair scraped against the concrete floor with a screech that made Riley flinch. He walked to the side of the bed, looming over her. He did not touch her, but his shadow fell across her face. You do have to tell me, Adrian said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with controlled menace, because right now, I am the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave in the Pine Barrens. My men want you dead. My captains want you dead. I'm the only one curious enough to ask why. So tell me, Riley. Who holds the leash? Riley felt the tears pricking at her eyes again, the same desperation that had stayed her hand in the club. She fought them back. She would not weep in front of him. They have my brother, she whispered. Adrian did not move. Keep talking. His name is Noah, Riley said, the words spilling out now that the dam had broken. He is 19. He got mixed up with the wrong people. Low-level runners for Iron Bridge. He owes them money, a lot of money. They took him 3 days ago, and the price for his life was mine. Adrian concluded. Yes. Adrian studied her face, searching for the lie. He looked for the twitch of a muscle, the shift in her gaze, the telltale signs of deception he had spent 20 years mastering. He saw only raw, bleeding truth. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the bedspread near her hand. Riley scrambled to grab it, her handcuffs clanking against the metal frame. She unfolded the paper with shaking fingers. It was a grainy, black-and-white photograph. It looked like a still from a security camera. In the center of the frame, tied to a wooden chair in a dark room, was Noah. His face was swollen, one eye shut, a line of dried blood tracking from his lip to his chin. He looked terrified. Riley let out a strangled sound, an half sob, half scream. She pressed her hand over her mouth, her eyes devouring the image. He's alive. Adrian watched her reaction carefully, the way her hands shook, the way she crumbled at the sight of the boy. It confirmed everything. She was not a traitor. She was a sister. And in Adrian's world, loyalty to blood was the only currency that mattered. He's being held in a warehouse near the docks. Adrian said, my contacts confirmed it an hour ago. Ironbridge is keeping him on ice until the job is done. Riley looked up at him, her eyes fierce. You have to let me go. I have to get him. You will never get within a mile of him, Adrian said ruthlessly. You failed the hit. Victor Hale is not a forgiving man. If you walk back in there empty-handed, he will kill Noah in front of you before he kills you. Riley slumped back against the pillows, the photo crumpling in her fist. Then what do I do? Adrian walked back to the chair and sat down. He smoothed the fabric of his trousers, his expression shifting from interrogator to strategist. You work for me. Riley blinked. Excuse me? You are a ghost, Adrian repeated. Victor thinks you are either dead or on the run. He does not know I have you. To him, the contract is still open. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers. I am going to offer you a deal. Riley Shaw. A deal that saves your brother and keeps you breathing, but it will require you to trust the man you tried to murder. Riley stared at him. What kind of deal? You will go back to Ironbridge, Adrian said. You will tell them you were compromised but you escaped. You will tell them you are still planning to kill me. You will be my eyes and ears inside their organization. You will feed me their routes, their safe houses, their shipments. You will help me dismantle them brick by brick. And Noah? Riley asked, her voice trembling. I will bring him home, Adrian said. The promise hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Riley searched his face. Why would you do that? I put a gun to your back. Adrian's expression softened. Just a fraction. It was the first crack in the armor she had seen since she woke up. Because you didn't pull the trigger, he said quietly. And because I know what it is to burn the world down for family. He stood up and walked to the door. I will have my men bring you food. We start planning in an hour. Wait, Riley called out. Adrian paused, his hand on the doorknob. How do I know you won't kill me once you get what you want? Riley asked. Adrian turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. I gave you my word, he said, speaking the words slowly, giving them weight. I do not harm women, and I do not break my promises. You are safe with me, Riley, as long as you are mine. He walked out, leaving her alone with the echoing click of the lock and the grainy photo of her brother. The next 3 days were a blur of tension and coffee. The safe house transformed from a prison into a war room. Adrian had the handcuffs removed, though a guard was always posted outside the door. He brought in maps, blueprints, and dossiers, spreading them out over the small kitchen table. Riley sat across from him, her military training kicking back into gear. She knew how to read terrain, she knew how to spot choke points, but Adrian taught her the language of the underworld. He pointed to a map of the harbor. This is not just a dock, he explained, his finger tracing a supply route. This is where the unions intersect with the cartels. Power here is not about guns. It is about who signs the manifest. Riley frowned. So you bribe them? We incentivize them, Adrian corrected. Everyone has a price. Riley, for some. It is money for others. It is protection for you. It is Noah. Riley bristled at the comparison. It is not the same. I am doing this to save a life. You are doing it to expand an empire. Adrian looked up from the map, his gaze sharp. You think you have the moral high ground because you hold a gun for the government instead of a family? I keep order in this city. Without me, Ironbridge floods the streets with poison. I protect my people. By killing anyone who gets in your way, Riley shot back. By removing threats, Adrian said coolly. It is a surgical necessity. Riley scoffed. You justify murder with fancy words. It is still murder. And you justify your assassination attempt with love, Adrian countered, his voice rising slightly. Does that make the bullet any less lethal? If you had killed me, my men would have started a war that would have burned Harborview to the ground. Hundreds would have died. Your morality is just as bloody as mine. Riley. They stared at each other across the table, the air crackling with frustration. Riley hated that he had a point. She hated even more that she respected his intelligence. He was not the mindless thug she had expected. He was brilliant, calculating, and dangerously charismatic, and he listened to her. When she pointed out a flaw in his surveillance grid, he didn't dismiss her. He fixed it. When she suggested a different extraction route for the eventual rescue of Noah, he nodded and integrated it into the plan. They were two soldiers from different armies, finding a rhythm in the strategy of war. It was late in the evening on the 4th day when the atmosphere in the safe house shattered. The sound of tires screeching on the pavement outside signaled Adrian's return. The front door slammed open, and shouting voices filled the hallway. Riley stood up from the sofa, her heart racing. Adrian stormed into the room. He looked like a man who had walked through hell. His suit jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was torn at the shoulder and stained with a shocking amount of bright red blood. His hair was disheveled, wet with rain and sweat. Riley gasped, "You're hurt." "It is not mine," Adrian snarled. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kicking a chair out of his way. It clattered against the wall. He stopped in front of her, radiating heat and fury. "We were ambushed," he said, his voice a low growl. "The warehouse on 5th Street. The one you said was a low-level drop point. It was a trap. 10 Iron Bridge shooters were waiting in the rafters." Riley's eyes widened. "I didn't know. That was the intel I had from 2 weeks ago. Things must have changed. Or maybe you withheld the update," Adrian accused, stepping closer. "Maybe you are still hedging your bets. Maybe you think if you get me killed, Victor will give you Noah as a reward." Riley recoiled as if he had slapped her. "I would never do that. I told you everything I knew. My driver is dead," Adrian shouted, the control finally snapping. "Marco took a bullet in the leg. I had to carry him out under fire. Do not lie to me, Riley. I am not lying," Riley yelled back, her own temper igniting. She stepped into his space, shoving him in the chest. "I am risking everything for this. I am sitting here, trapped in this box, trusting you to save my brother, and you come in here and accuse me of treason. You are a professional liar." Adrian grabbed her wrists, his grip hard, stopping her from shoving him again. "You infiltrated my club. You smiled at my men while you planned to kill me. Why should I trust a single word that comes out of your mouth? Because I have no other choice," Riley screamed, fighting against his hold. She shoved him again, harder this time, fueled by days of fear and helplessness. Adrian stumbled back a step but didn't let go. He spun her around, pinning her against the wall near the kitchen entrance. The impact knocked the breath out of her. He held her wrists above her head, his body pressing hers into the plaster. They were chest to chest, breathing heavily, the adrenaline from the ambush and the argument swirling together in a toxic, heady mix. "Tell me the truth," Adrian demanded, his face inches from hers. His eyes were wild, searching hers with a desperate intensity. "Are you playing me?" "No," Riley breathed, staring right back into the fire of his gaze. "I am not playing you. I am terrified. Adrian, I am terrified they are going to kill Noah, and I am terrified that you are going to decide I am not worth the trouble and put a bullet in my head." Adrian froze. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the flush on her cheeks, the rapid pulse of the vein in her neck, the honesty that stripped her bare. She wasn't an assassin in that moment. She was just a woman backed into a corner, fighting for the only thing she loved. The rage in his eyes began to recede, replaced by something darker, heavier. The grip on her wrists loosened. He didn't let go, but his hands shifted, his fingers uncurled, sliding down from her forearms to encircle her wrists gently. His thumb pressed against the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse point. It was racing, fluttering like a hummingbird wing against his skin. He felt the rhythm of her life under his hand. It was intimate in a way that shocked him. He was covered in another man's blood, fresh from a gunfight, and yet the only thing he could focus on was the warmth of her skin and the scent of her fear and something else. Attraction. Riley felt it too. The anger drained out of her, leaving her weak. She was hyper-aware of his body against hers, the hardness of his chest, the heat radiating off him, the smell of rain and violence that clung to his shirt. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin of her wrist, a subconscious, soothing motion. It sent a jolt of electricity up her arm that settled low in her stomach. "You are not just a weapon to me, Riley," Adrian murmured, his voice rough with conflicting emotions. Riley's breath hitched. She looked at his mouth, then back up to his eyes. They were dark, dilated, full of a hunger that had nothing to do with war. For a second, she thought he was going to kiss her. She realized, with a start, that she wanted him to. The silence stretched, charged and dangerous. Then, Adrian blinked. The spell broke. He stepped back abruptly, releasing her wrists as if they burned him. He turned away, running a hand through his damp hair, his jaw clenched tight. "We cannot do this," he said, and his voice strained. "We cannot afford distractions, not when Noah is still out there." Riley wrapped her arms around herself, missing the warmth of his contact immediately. "You are right," Adrian nodded, not looking at her. "I need to clean up. I need to check on Marco." He walked toward the bathroom, stopping at the doorway. "I will be back." Riley stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding a rhythm she didn't understand. It was past midnight when he returned. Riley was sitting at the small table, staring unseeingly at a blueprint of the Iron Bridge headquarters. Adrian walked in quietly. He had showered and changed into a clean black t-shirt and loose trousers. The armor of the suit was gone, making him look younger, more human. He carried a brown paper bag. He set it down on the table between them. "The rations they stock in here are cardboard," he said. "I brought real food." Riley looked inside the bag. 2 heavy containers of pasta from an Italian restaurant, steaming hot, and a loaf of crusty bread. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the room, chasing away the sterile scent of bleach. "Thank you," she said softly. Adrian sat on the edge of the table, not in the chair opposite her, but close enough that his knee almost brushed her arm. He opened a container and handed her a plastic fork. "Eat," he commanded gently. "You need your strength. Tomorrow we finalize the plan for your return to Iron Bridge." Riley took a bite. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. They ate in silence. It wasn't the tense, hostile silence of the interrogation, nor the charged, explosive silence of the argument. It was a companionable silence. It was the quiet of 2 people who had seen the worst of each other and decided to stay in the room anyway. Riley watched him out of the corner of her eye as he ate. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper. "Is Marco okay?" she asked. "He will limp for a month, but he will live," Adrian said. "He's too stubborn to die." Riley nodded. "I am glad." Adrian stopped eating. He turned his head to look at her. His gaze dropped to her wrists, where faint red marks from his grip lingered on her pale skin. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low, "for hurting you." Riley swallowed hard. "You didn't hurt me, Adrian." He looked into her eyes, and the connection from earlier flared back to life, steady and warm like a coal under ash. "I promise you." "Riley," he said, sounding like he was making a vow to a saint, "I will get your brother back, even if I have to burn the whole city down to do it." Riley believed him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in the dark. She nodded, reaching out to break off a piece of bread, and as her hand moved, her pinky finger brushed against his on the tabletop. Neither of them pulled away. The necklace was cheap. It was a flimsy silver chain with a tarnished pendant shaped like a teardrop, the kind of trinket one might find in a discount bin at a gas station. But as Adrian Costa fastened it around Riley's neck, his fingers brushing against the sensitive skin of her nape, it felt heavier than a shackle. "It is live," Adrian said, his voice low and vibrating near her ear. "The microphone is in the setting of the stone. The tracker is in the clasp. Do not take it off. Not to shower, not to sleep. If the signal goes dark for more than 2 minutes, I send the cavalry." Riley stood perfectly still in the entryway of the safe house, her breathing shallow. She was dressed in the tattered, dirty clothes she had been captured in. Her face was artfully bruised, makeup applied by one of Adrian's specialists mixed with the real exhaustion etched into her features. "I understand," Riley said. She turned to face him. Adrian looked at her, his dark eyes scanning her face with a critical, almost painful intensity. He reached out, adjusting the collar of her jacket to hide the chain, his knuckles grazing her collarbone. The touch was strictly practical, yet it lingered a second longer than necessary. "Remember the story," he instructed. "You picked the lock, you knocked out a guard, you ran 3 miles through the sewers. You are desperate, you are angry. You are still looking for a way to finish the job. I know the script." "Adrian," Riley said, meeting his gaze. "Good." Adrian stepped back, the mask of the cold syndicate boss sliding back into place. "My men will drop you 2 blocks from the Iron Bridge perimeter. You are on your own from there." Riley nodded. She walked out into the night without looking back, the silver teardrop resting cold against her sternum, a secret weight that bound her to the man she was leaving behind. The headquarters of the Iron Bridge cartel was a stark contrast to the sleek, shadowy elegance of Club Vento. It was a sprawling, repurposed meat-packing plant on the industrial edge of Harborview. The air inside smelled permanently of rust, bleach, and stale cigarette smoke. The lighting was harsh and fluorescent, buzzing with an irritating hum that grated on Riley's nerves. Riley had walked in through the front gates, hands raised, looking like something the cat had dragged in and chewed on. She had spun her lie to the guards, to the lieutenants, and finally to Victor Hale himself. Victor was a man who looked like he had been drawn with sharp angles. He was tall, gaunt, and possessed a nervous, frantic energy that made him unpredictable. He sat behind a metal desk, cleaning his fingernails with a switchblade as Riley recounted her fabricated escape. She told him about the safe house. She told him about the loose grate in the ventilation shaft. She pitched her voice perfectly, trembling with residual adrenaline, but hard with frustration. "I can still do it," she had insisted, slamming her hand on his desk. "I know his security protocols now. I know where he sleeps. Give me another chance." Victor had watched her with lizard-like eyes. He didn't trust her. Riley could feel his suspicion radiating like heat, but he was also arrogant. He believed his leverage over Noah was absolute. He believed he owned her, so he let her stay. For 2 weeks, Riley lived on a razor's edge. She was given a cot in a communal barracks that smelled of unwashed bodies and damp wool. She spent her days running menial security drills and her nights sitting in the corner of the mess hall, listening. Every word was a weapon. She recorded patrol routes. She memorized the delivery schedules of weapons shipments. She noted the names of corrupt city officials who visited the plant under the cover of darkness. And all the while, the tiny microphone at her throat hummed, beaming her life directly to Adrian. Her only lifeline was the burner phone Adrian had taped under a loose tile in the third-floor bathroom, the only room in the building with a window that opened to the alleyway, allowing for a signal. Every night at 3 a.m, Riley would slip out of her bunk, ghost through the corridors, and lock herself in the bathroom stall. She would dial the number from memory. Report. Adrian's voice would answer. Always on the first ring. He never sounded asleep. Riley would whisper the day's intelligence into the phone, her voice barely louder than a breath. She listed license plate numbers, guard rotations, and safe combinations. Adrian would listen in silence, only interrupting to ask for clarification. His questions were surgical, precise, but as the days turned into a week and the week dragged on, the dynamic of the calls began to shift. "Riley," Adrian said one night after she had finished detailing a meeting between Victor and a supplier from out of state. "You sound tired." "I am fine," Riley whispered, leaning her forehead against the cool, graffiti-covered metal of the stall wall. "You are slurring your words," Adrian observed. "When was the last time you slept for more than an hour? I can sleep when Noah is safe," she snapped, the fatigue fraying her temper. There was a pause on the line. Then Adrian's voice came back, softer, stripping away the command. "You did good work today. The intel on the shipment is solid. We're going to intercept it tomorrow. You are making a difference. Riley." Riley closed her eyes, letting the sound of his praise wash over her. In this hellhole of metal and malice, his voice was the only thing that felt real. "Get some sleep if you can," Adrian said gently. "I will be here tomorrow." The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Riley was called into Victor's office. The mood was volatile. Adrian's crew had successfully hijacked 2 of Ironbridge's supply trucks based on Riley's intel, and Victor was bleeding money. He was pacing the room, throwing whiskey bottles against the wall. He turned his rage on Riley. He didn't suspect her of being the leak, not yet, but he needed a punching bag. He pulled up a live video feed on his laptop and shoved the screen in Riley's face. It was Noah. He was thinner than before. He was sitting on a concrete floor, his hands bound behind him. A masked guard was standing over him, holding a heavy baton. "You tell me you are useful." Victor spat, saliva flying from his lips, but Costa is still breathing, and my trucks are disappearing. "Maybe I need to motivate you." Victor nodded to the screen. The guard on the video swung the baton. It struck Noah in the ribs. The sound of the impact, tinny and distorted through the laptop speakers, hit Riley harder than a physical blow. Noah curled into a ball, screaming silently. Riley lunged forward, a primal noise tearing from her throat, but two of Victor's men held her back. 2 days! Victor screamed. You have 2 days to put a bullet in Adrian Costa's head, or I send you your brother's fingers in a box. They threw her out of the office. Riley stumbled down the hallway, her vision blurring, her heart hammering a frantic, broken rhythm against her ribs. She needed to get out. She needed to breathe. She signaled for a meet. The location was a derelict parking garage in the lower district, a neutral ground between the territories. It was pouring rain, a relentless deluge that turned the city into a watercolor painting of gray and black. Riley parked the stolen sedan she had used to slip away on the 4th level. The garage was open to the elements on the sides, the wind whipping the rain in sideways. It was freezing, but Riley was burning up with panic. She saw him standing near a concrete pillar. Adrian. He was wearing a long charcoal wool coat, the collar turned up against the wind. His hands were buried deep in his pockets. He was perfectly still, a statue in the storm, his eyes scanning the shadows. When he saw her car, his posture didn't change, but his focus locked onto her immediately. Riley got out of the car. Her legs felt weak. She was soaked in seconds, her hair plastering to her face. She walked toward him, shivering violently. Not from the cold, but from the aftershocks of the video. Adrian watched her approach. His gaze started at her face, checking for injuries, then swept down her body, looking for blood. When he saw she was physically unharmed, his shoulders dropped an inch, a release of tension he wasn't aware he was holding. Report, he said, but the word lacked its usual bite. He stepped out from the shelter of the pillar to meet her. Riley tried to pull herself together. She tried to be the soldier. She tried to lock her knees and straighten her spine. Victor. Victor is moving the timeline up, she said. Her voice was brittle, cracking like dry ice. He suspects a leak. He doesn't know it is me, but he is paranoid. He wants you dead in 48 hours. Adrian nodded, stepping closer. We anticipated this. As we dismantle his operation, he gets desperate. It is a good sign, Riley. It means he is making mistakes. No. Riley's voice rose, shrill and terrified. It is not a good sign. He showed me. He showed me Noah. She choked on the name. The image of the baton striking her brother's ribs flashed behind her eyes, blinding her. He hurt him. Adrian, he's hurting him right now because I haven't killed you yet, and if I don't do it, She couldn't finish the sentence. The professionalism she had clung to for weeks shattered. The walls came down. She wasn't an agent, she wasn't a sniper. She was just a sister who was failing the only person she was sworn to protect. Riley sagged. Her knees actually gave out. Adrian moved before she could hit the ground. He closed the distance between them in a blur of motion. His hands shot out, gripping her firmly by the upper arms, holding her up. Riley, look at me! She couldn't. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Adrian tightened his grip, giving her something solid to anchor herself to. He pulled her out of the driving rain, maneuvering her until her back was against the dry concrete of the pillar, and his body was shielding her from the wind. He hurt him. She sobbed, her hands coming up to clutch at the lapels of his coat, her fists bunched the expensive wool, holding on as if he were a raft in a hurricane. I can't do this. Adrian, I can't watch him die. You won't have to, Adrian said. His voice was fierce, low, and absolutely certain. He leaned down, forcing her to look at him. I moved the extraction team into position an hour ago. We found the warehouse. Riley's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, searching his face for the lie. You found him? We found him. Adrian confirmed. He is alive. We are waiting for the shift change to go in. I promised you. Riley, I promised I would bring him home. I did not lie to you. The relief hit her so hard it made her dizzy. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She slumped forward, her forehead colliding with his chest. Adrian didn't stiffen. He didn't pull away. Instinct took over, overriding the code, overriding the distance he tried to keep between them. His arms came around her, wrapping her in a crushing, protective embrace. One hand pressed flat against her back, Holding her close, the other came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her damp hair. He held her while she shook. He rested his chin on the top of her head, breathing in the scent of rain and cheap soap and fear. He could feel her heart pounding against his own chest, a frantic drumbeat that matched his own. For a long minute, they just stood there in the dark. Gray garage, the world outside, the war, the cartels, the violence, faded into background noise. There was only the heat of their bodies and the shared burden of survival. Slowly, the shaking stopped. Riley took a deep, shuddering breath, inhaling the scent of him, wood smoke, rain, and something uniquely Adrian. She realized how tightly she was holding him. She realized how tightly he was holding her. She pulled back, just enough to look up. Adrian's face was inches from hers. The shadows of the garage hid the sharp angles of his jaw, softening his features. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. The cold calculation was gone. In its place was a raw, unguarded intensity. He lifted his hand from her back. His thumb brushed a stray tear from her cheek, the pad of his finger rough and warm against her cold skin. He traced the line of her jaw, his touch lingering, mapping her face as if he were memorizing it. "You are shaking," he murmured. "So are you," Riley whispered. A fine tremor ran through his hands, not from cold, but from the adrenaline of having her this close, of seeing her pain and wanting to destroy the world to fix it. Adrian's gaze dropped to her mouth. Riley felt the air in her lungs vanish, the attraction that had sparked in the safe house, the tension that had simmered during the late-night phone calls, suddenly boiled over. It was a dangerous line to cross. He was the boss. She was the asset. He was the target. She was the assassin. But in the dark of the garage, none of that mattered. Riley leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. Adrian made a low sound in his throat, a sound of surrender. He lowered his forehead to rest against hers. "Riley." He breathed, a warning and a plea in one. "Don't stop," she whispered. Adrian tilted her chin up. He didn't rush. He gave her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, when she rose on her toes to meet him, he closed the distance. His mouth pressed against hers. It started tenderly, a soft exploration of contact, a question asked in silence. His lips were warm, firm, and tasted of the rain, but the moment their lips touched, the dam broke, the tenderness shattered into hunger. Adrian groaned, his hand at the back of her neck tightening, pulling her flush against him. Riley responded instantly, her mouth opening to him, her hands sliding up his coat to grip his shoulders. It was a kiss born of desperation. It was the release of weeks of terror, of secrets, of standing on the edge of a cliff. It was messy and urgent. Adrian devoured her, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her in a way that had nothing to do with business. Riley kissed him back with equal force. She pressed her body into his, seeking the heat, seeking the proof that she was alive. She felt his heart hammering against her chest, a rapid staccato that matched hers beat for beat. He walked her backward until she was pressed against the concrete pillar, his body shielding her completely from the open space of the garage. He was a wall of warmth and strength. His hands roamed over her back, down to her waist, gripping her tightly as if he were afraid she would vanish if he let go. Riley tangled her fingers in his hair, the wet strands silky between her fingers. She felt a possession take root in her chest. This man, this dangerous, complicated man, was hers, and she was his. They broke apart only when the need for air became painful. They stayed close, foreheads resting together, chests heaving as they gasped for breath. Their breath mingled in white puffs in the cold air. Adrian kept his hands on her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. His eyes were blown wide, the gold flecks in the iris burning with a dark fire. He looked wrecked. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield and didn't care. "We just made this a lot more complicated," he rasped, his voice rougher than usual. Riley swallowed, her lips swollen and tingling. "I know." Adrian looked at her, searching for regret. He found only the same terrifying clarity he felt. "Go back," he said. though he didn't let her go. Go back to Victor. Keep your head down. Riley nodded, her hands slowly sliding down his chest. And you? I am going to get your brother, Adrian vowed, pressing one last hard kiss to her forehead. And then I am going to kill Victor Hale for making you cry. He stepped back, the loss of his warmth hitting her like a physical blow. He buttoned his coat, the mask of the Mafia Don sliding back into place, but his eyes remained changed. Go, he ordered. Riley turned and ran back to her car, her heart soaring and sinking all at once. She drove out of the garage and back toward the hell of Iron Bridge, touching her lips, tasting the promise of a future that might just get them both killed. The memory of the kiss in the rain-slicked parking garage haunted Adrian Costa. It was a ghost that followed him through the marble corridors of his penthouse and the gritty backrooms of his empire. He tried to exorcise it with silence. For 3 days following their meeting, he kept his distance. He refused to schedule another face-to-face handoff. He relegated Riley to the status of an asset, a voice on a burner phone, a source of data, and nothing more. When she called at the designated hour of 3 in the morning, Adrian answered on the first ring, but his voice was a fortress. Report, he would say, the word sharp and impersonal. Riley, on the other end of the line, matched his tone. She gave him coordinates, she gave him names, but beneath the clipped, professional exchange, there was a current of unspoken longing that crackled like static. Adrian could hear the exhaustion in her breath. He could hear the tremor of fear she tried to hide, and despite his best efforts to remain the cold, detached general of the Costa Syndicate, his resolve fractured every time he was about to hang up. Stay safe, he would add. The command softer than intended? Do not take unnecessary risks. It is a little late for that, Riley would reply, her voice dry. The distance was meant to protect them. Adrian knew that emotion was a liability in his world. Caring for someone was the equivalent of handing your enemy a loaded gun and pointing it at your own heart. But the distance only made the worry sharper. Every hour he did not hear from her, his imagination painted vivid, horrific pictures of Victor Hale discovering her wire. Victor was indeed becoming paranoid. The Iron Bridge leader was bleeding territory and resources, and he knew it was coming from the inside. The atmosphere within the meatpacking plant had turned poisonous. Guards were doubled. Phones were confiscated randomly and smashed. Riley walked through the corridors with the feeling of a laser sight permanently fixed between her shoulder blades. On a Thursday night, the hammer dropped. Riley was scrubbing the floor of the mess hall, trying to look invisible, when 2 of Victor's lieutenants kicked the bucket over. Dirty water sloshed across her boots. Get up, Shaw, one of them barked. Boss wants you. Riley's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She kept her head down, wiping her hands on her trousers as she followed them. She expected an interrogation room. She expected the torture chair. Instead, they led her to the loading dock. Victor stood by a black van, surrounded by 6 of his most violent enforcers. He was manic, his eyes darting around the yard. You say you want to kill Costa, Victor said, stepping into Riley's personal space. You say you are loyal. Tonight, you prove it. Riley kept her face impassive. What is the job? We are hitting one of Costa's legitimate fronts, Victor sneered. The auto import garage on East Side. He keeps cash reserves in the safe there. We are going to burn it to the ground, and you are going to drive the lead car. Riley's stomach dropped. The East Side garage wasn't just a front. It was where Adrian kept his vintage car collection. It was where he spent his Tuesday nights working on engines to clear his head. And tonight was Tuesday. She had no way to warn him. Victor's men patted her down, checking for phones. They confiscated the burner she had hidden in her boot earlier that day. She was blind, and she was silent. Get in, Victor ordered. Riley climbed into the driver's seat of the lead sedan. Her mind raced. If she refused, she died, and Noah died. If she drove, she might lead a hit squad right to Adrian's doorstep. The convoy moved out, cutting through the rainy streets of Harborview like a funeral procession. Riley drove with white-knuckled precision, her brain cycling through tactical options. She couldn't stop the convoy. She couldn't signal Adrian. Her only choice was to sabotage the hit from the inside once the bullets started flying. They arrived at the garage 20 minutes later. The facility was quiet. The large bay doors closed. Riley killed the headlights as they approached. "Ram the gate!" the lieutenant in the passenger seat yelled. Riley floored the accelerator, but at the last second she jerked the wheel hard to the left. The car clipped the heavy steel gatepost instead of smashing through the latch. The impact was jarring, the airbag deploying with a cloud of white dust that filled the cabin. "What are you doing?" the lieutenant screamed. "Stunned. Steering failure," Riley lied, coughing as she shoved the deflated bag aside. The element of surprise was lost. The crash echoed through the quiet street like a gunshot. Inside the garage, floodlights snapped on. The Costa security team was awake. Gunfire erupted instantly. The windshield of Riley's car shattered as bullets from the garage defenders raked the vehicle. She scrambled out of the driver's side, keeping low, crawling toward the cover of a concrete planter. The Iron Bridge men were pouring out of the van behind her, returning fire with automatic weapons. It was chaos. Riley drew the pistol Victor had given her, a heavy, rusted thing that looked prone to jamming. She aimed not at the Costa guards, but at the tires of the Iron Bridge van. She fired twice, blowing out the front rubber, ensuring their escape would be crippled. Then she saw him. Adrian emerged from the side door of the garage office. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket. He held a submachine gun, his face a mask of concentrated rage. He moved with lethal efficiency, returning fire, taking down an Iron Bridge shooter who was flanking his men. Riley froze. He was right there, 50 yards away. An Iron Bridge enforcer near her raised a grenade launcher, aiming for the office where Adrian stood. Riley didn't think. She turned her weapon on her own ally and fired a round into the pavement near his feet. The sparks and the noise startled him. He flinched, and the grenade went wide, exploding harmlessly against a brick wall 20 feet from Adrian. The enforcer spun around, eyes wild. "What the hell are you doing?" "They are flanking us," Riley shouted back, lying through her teeth. "I saw a sniper in the confusion." Adrian looked across the lot. The floodlights caught Riley's face for a split second. She saw the recognition in his eyes. She saw him register that she was there, weapon in hand, standing amidst the men trying to kill him. He didn't see her shoot the pavement. He didn't see her crash the car on purpose. He only saw the woman he had spared leading a raid on his sanctuary. "Retreat," the Iron Bridge lieutenant yelled, realizing they were outgunned and their transport was damaged. "Fall back to the backup vehicle." Riley was grabbed by the collar and dragged toward the second van. She looked back one last time. Adrian was standing over the body of a fallen enemy, staring after her, his expression a terrifying mix of betrayal and fury. The debrief was set for 2 hours later. Riley had barely managed to convince Victor that the failed raid was due to Costa's superior security and bad luck. She had slipped away from the meatpacking plant under the pretense of checking a perimeter alarm, stealing a car and driving like a madwoman to the Riverside safe house. It was a small, derelict boathouse on the edge of the murky river, far from the prying eyes of the city. Rain drummed relentlessly against the tin roof. Riley burst through the door, soaked and shivering, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Adrian was already there. He stood by the window, staring out at the black water. He didn't turn when she entered. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. It wasn't the warm, confused tension of the garage. It was cold. It was dangerous. "You were there," Adrian said. He didn't ask it. He stated it. Riley closed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. "I didn't have a choice. Victor sprang it on me. I couldn't warn you without blowing my cover." Adrian turned slowly. His face was pale, his eyes dark pits of anger. "You led them to my door. Riley, you drove the lead car. 3 of my men are in surgery right now." "I saved your life," Riley shouted, pushing off the door. "That grenade was meant for you." "I made the shooter miss. I crashed the gate to kill the momentum. I blew the tires on the van. I saw you standing with them," Adrian countered, his voice rising. "I saw you holding a weapon while my people bled. How do I know you missed on purpose? How do I know you aren't just hedging your bets? keeping me alive just in case Victor fails. Because I could have killed you 3 times over by now, Riley yelled back, the accusation cutting deep. She walked toward him, anger overcoming her fear. I am risking everything for this. I am living in a pit, surrounded by monsters, waiting for them to find that wire and cut my throat. And you stand there and judge me because I had to play the part you forced me to play? I didn't force you to raid my business. Adrian slammed his hand on the wooden table, the sound like a gunshot. I told you to gather intel, not participate in assaults. I am a soldier, Adrian. I do what I have to do to survive the mission. You are playing both sides. Adrian accused, stepping into her space. He towered over her, radiating fury. You are trying to save everyone, and you are going to get us all killed. You can't be loyal to a ghost brother and a crime boss at the same time. You have to choose. I chose you, Riley screamed, shoving him in the chest. The confession hung in the air, raw and unintended. Adrian stumbled back a step, stunned. Riley stood there, chest heaving, rain dripping from her hair, her eyes blazing with a fierce, wounded light. I chose you, she repeated, her voice breaking. I could have run. I could have sold you out tonight and bought Noah's safety with your head, but I didn't. I saved you, because I am an idiot who fell for the target. Adrian stared at her. The anger drained out of his face, replaced by a shock that quickly morphed into something else, something darker, hungrier. He looked at her wet clothes, the mud on her boots, the fire in her eyes. He realized how close she had come to dying tonight. He realized how close he had come to killing her in the chaos of the firefight. The fear of losing her crashed into him, shattering his control. He reached out and grabbed her hips, pulling her roughly against him. He crowded her back until her thighs hit the edge of the heavy wooden table. Say that again, he growled, his voice low and rough. Riley didn't shrink back. She lifted her chin, challenging him. I chose you. Adrian let out a sound that was half groan, half curse. He crashed his mouth down on hers. This wasn't the tender kiss of the parking garage. This was war. It was desperate and angry and consuming. Adrian kissed her like he wanted to breathe for her. He bit at her lower lip, his hands gripping her waist so hard she knew that there would be bruises tomorrow. Riley met him with equal force. She wrapped her arms around his neck, tangling her fingers in his hair, pulling him closer. She needed this. She needed to feel him solid and alive against her. She needed to burn away the image of the gunfight, the cold fear of the Iron Bridge plant. Adrian lifted her, and Riley wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively. He turned, staggering slightly with her weight, and pinned her against the wall before moving them toward the worn leather sofa in the corner of the room. They collapsed onto it, a tangle of limbs and wet fabric. Riley straddled his lap, her hands frantically exploring the breadth of his shoulders, the muscles of his back through his shirt. She felt the heavy beat of his heart against her palms. Adrian's hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her waist, sliding up her rib cage. He broke the kiss to bury his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling sharply. He kissed the pulse point there, his stubble grazing her skin, sending shivers racing down her spine. You scare the hell out of me, he murmured against her skin, his voice vibration she could feel in her bones. I saw you in that lot. I thought I lost you. You can't lose me, Riley whispered, breathless, tilting her head back to give him better access. I am right here. The world outside ceased to exist. There was no Victor, no Noah, no syndicate war. There was only the smell of rain and the heat of Adrian's body. There was only the friction of their clothes and the desperate need to be closer, to merge until there was no space left for secrets or lies. Adrian's hand moved to the hem of her shirt, his fingers brushing the skin of her stomach. The touch was electric. Riley gasped, her hips rocking forward against him. The movement seemed to snap Adrian back to reality. He froze. His forehead rested against her collarbone. His breathing was ragged, harsh sounds in the quiet room. He held perfectly still, his hands tightening on her waist, not moving further. Riley waited, her heart pounding in her ears. Adrian? He didn't move for a long moment, then, slowly, painfully, He pulled his hands away from her shirt. He gripped her hips again, halting her movement. "We have to stop," he rasped. Riley blinked, the rejection stinging like a slap. "Why?" Adrian lifted his head. His eyes were blown wide, dark with desire, but shadowed by a terrifying clarity. He looked at her swollen lips, her flushed skin, and he looked like a man in agony. "Because if I do this, if I take you now, I won't be able to send you back to him." Riley went still. She sat on his lap, the heat between them slowly cooling into a chill reality. "If I let myself have this," Adrian continued, his voice hoarse, "I will lose my edge. I will be thinking about you in my bed instead of the enemy at my gate. I will hesitate. And in my world, hesitation is death. It will get you killed. Riley, and I cannot survive that." Riley stared at him. She saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't rejecting her because he didn't want her. He was rejecting her because he wanted her too much. He was terrified that his love would be the weapon Victor used to destroy them. She slowly untangled her legs from his waist. She slid off his lap, her boots hitting the floor with a thud. She smoothed her shirt, her hands shaking. "You are right," she whispered, her voice hollow. Adrian sat on the sofa, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He looked defeated. "I am sorry." "Don't be," Riley said, turning away to hide the tears threatening to fall. "You are being the boss. That is what I need you to be." She walked to the door, her body aching with the loss of his touch. "I will get the intel," she said, her voice strengthening with resolve. "I will finish this, and then we can figure out what this is." Adrian didn't look up. He couldn't go. He said, "Before I change my mind." Riley walked out into the rain, leaving him alone in the dark. The truce between the syndicates was a fragile, rotting thing. And 3 days later, Victor Hale set fire to it. He called a meeting. It was to be a negotiation. He claimed a parley to discuss territory lines and end the skirmishes that were bleeding both sides dry. He invited Adrian to a neutral warehouse in the industrial district, but before the meeting, he summoned Riley. His office was dark, lit only by the glow of the city skyline through the dirty window. Victor sat behind his desk, looking like a skeleton in a suit. "You have been useful, Shaw," he said, his voice slick with malice, "but usefulness has an expiration date." Riley stood at attention, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. "I am doing my job. Victor, are you?" Victor stood up and walked around the desk. He held a tablet in his hand. He tapped the screen and turned it toward her. It was a live feed of Noah, but this time, he wasn't alone. A man stood behind him, holding a pistol to the back of Noah's head. Noah was crying, his shoulders shaking. Riley lunged forward, but a guard stepped in her path, shoving her back. "Relax," Victor said, smiling thinly. "He is fine, for now." "But that depends on you. What do you want?" Riley hissed. "I am meeting Costa tomorrow night," Victor said. "I am going to offer him peace, but peace is boring. I prefer victory." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of peppermint and rot. "I need his escape route," Victor whispered. "Costa always has a back door. He always has a contingency. I want to know exactly where he will run when things go wrong. I want his security details grid. I want the codes to his armored transport." Riley felt the blood drain from her face. If she gave him that, Adrian was a dead man. There would be no escape. Victor would slaughter him. "I don't have that level of access," Riley lied. "You are the double agent," Victor snapped. "You are the one he trusts. You have 24 hours to get it." He tapped the screen again. On the video, the gunman cocked the pistol. The sound was loud and final. "If you don't give me the route by tomorrow noon, the boy dies, and then I send you his body." Victor stepped back, his smile widening. "Choose, Riley, your brother's life or your lover's, because I know you are sleeping with him. I can smell it on you." Riley stood frozen. She looked at Noah's terrified face on the screen. She thought of Adrian in the safe house, pulling away to protect her. She thought of the code he lived by. She had to make a choice, and either way, part of her was going to die. "I will get it," she said, her voice dead. "Good girl," Victor purred. Riley turned and walked out of the office. She walked down the long, steel corridor, her mind calm with the terrible clarity of the decision she had just made. She knew what she had to do. She just hoped Adrian would forgive her in the next life, because he certainly wouldn't in this one. The air in Victor Hale's office was stagnant, heavy with the smell of stale cigar smoke and impending violence. Riley stood before his desk, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to lock them into fists at her sides. Victor held a tablet in one hand and a heavy, matte black pistol in the other. He placed the weapon on the mahogany surface with a deliberate, heavy clatter. "You have been stalling." "Riley," Victor said, his voice deceptively light. "You feed me scraps, small shipments, low-level enforcement rosters, but today is the day we feast." He tapped the screen of the tablet. The grainy video feed of Noah flickered to life. Her brother was slumped against a concrete wall, his face pale and gaunt, eyes squeezed shut as if trying to block out a nightmare. "I am done playing games," Victor continued. "I know Costa is moving cash reserves tonight to prepare for our peace talks. I know he is taking the Southern Armored route. What I do not know is the specific security protocol for the bridge crossing. Do they sweep it first? Do they have a sniper overwatch, or do they drive blind?" Riley swallowed, her throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. "I do not know. He does not tell me." "Do not lie to me," Victor roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "You are the woman he trusts. You are the one whispering in his ear." He picked up the phone on his desk. "If you do not give me the protocol in 10 seconds, I make the call, and the next video you see of your brother will be a snuff film. 1, 2... Riley's mind fractured. She could see Noah's chest rising and falling on the screen. She could feel the ghost of Adrian's touch on her skin from the night in the boathouse. She was trapped between the two halves of her heart. If she stayed silent, Noah died. If she told the truth, Adrian died. She made a choice born of panic and a desperate, fragile hope. "They do not sweep the bridge," she blurted out, the words tasting like ash. "They rely on speed, but they use a decoy lead car. The second vehicle carries the target." It was a half-truth. Adrian always swept the bridge, always. By telling Victor otherwise, she was handing him an opening to attack, but she prayed that when Adrian saw the Iron Bridge team setting up without fear of a sweep, his own scouts would spot the trap miles before the convoy arrived. She was banking on Adrian's paranoia to save him. Victor smiled, a jagged expression that didn't reach his dead eyes. "See? That was not so hard. The ambush was not the surgical failure Riley had prayed for. It was a slaughter. Riley's gamble relied on Adrian following his standard operating procedure. But that night, Adrian had been distracted. He had been thinking about a woman with sad eyes and a brave soul. And for the first time in his career, he had skipped the preliminary scout sweep to make the meeting time. The convoy hit the bridge at 50 miles per hour. The explosion that tore through the lead vehicle shook the foundations of the city. Adrian, riding in the second armored SUV, was thrown against the door as the shockwave shattered the bulletproof glass. Metal screamed, tires blew out. The vehicle spun wildly across the wet asphalt, slamming into the guardrail and teetering over the dark water below. "Get down!" Marco screamed, shoving Adrian to the floorboards just as the machine gun fire raked the side of the car. Adrian's ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine. He could smell burning rubber and the copper tang of blood. He reached for his weapon, his hand coming away slick with red. A graze wound on his temple was bleeding freely, blinding him in one eye. He kicked the door open and rolled out onto the pavement, firing blindly into the smoke. "They knew!" Marco shouted, firing over the hood of the car. "They knew we didn't send the scouts!" Adrian froze. The realization hit him harder than the explosion. Only 3 people knew the route and the timing: him, Marco, and the woman he had held in his arms 3 nights ago. A coldness that had nothing to do with the night air settled in Adrian's chest. The hope he had nurtured, the vulnerable part of him that had started to believe in a life after the war, died on that bridge. It was replaced by a familiar, icy rage. "Clear the sector," Adrian ordered, his voice terrifyingly calm amidst the chaos, "and bring me Riley Shaw." The warehouse was a cavernous space on the edge of the shipyard, filled with shadows and the sound of dripping water. It was a place where people went to disappear. Two of Adrian's enforcers dragged Riley through the metal doors. She was not fighting them. She looked small, defeated. Her jacket was torn, her face bruised from where Victor's men had roughed her up before cutting her loose. Thinking she had served her purpose, they threw her onto the concrete floor in the center of the room. Riley scrambled to her knees, gasping for breath. She looked up and saw him. Adrian sat on a wooden crate 10 feet away. He was still wearing the clothes from the ambush. His white shirt was ruined, stained with grime and his own drying blood. A hasty bandage was taped over his left temple, but it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were dead. The golden flecks she had admired were gone, swallowed by a flat, obsidian darkness. He looked at her not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a judge looking at a corpse. Marco stood behind him, hand on his holster, looking ready to put a bullet in Riley's head the moment Adrian gave the nod. "Leave us," Adrian said. "Adrian." "She is dangerous," Marco argued, stepping forward. "She set us up. We lost 4 men tonight, 4 good men. I said leave us," Adrian barked. The sound echoed off the steel beams, sharp and final. Marco glared at Riley with pure hatred, spat on the floor near her feet, and signaled the other men. They filed out, the heavy door groaning shut behind them, sealing the 2 of them in the silence. Riley shivered. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to check his wound, but the distance between them felt like an ocean. Adrian stood up slowly. He winced, his hand going to his side, but he walked toward her with a steady, predatory grace. He stopped when the toes of his shoes were inches from her knees. "Did you give them my routes?" The question was soft. It was the same tone he had used when he asked her what she wanted for dinner. It made the horror of it worse. Riley looked up, tears spilling over her lashes. "Adrian, did you give them my roots?" he repeated, his voice not rising a decibel. "Yes," she whispered. The word hung in the air, a confession that shattered the last of the illusion. Adrian closed his eyes for a brief second, his jaw tightening until the muscle feathered. When he opened them, the pain was visible, raw and bleeding. "Why?" "They had Noah," Riley choked out. The words came rushing out in a torrent of grief. "Victor put him on a live feed. He had a gun to his head. He gave me 10 seconds. He wanted the bridge protocol. I tried. God, Adrian, I tried to twist it. I told him you didn't sweep, hoping you would see them setting up. I thought you would see the trap. I never meant for anyone to die. I just wanted to buy time." She reached for the hem of his trousers, a desperate plea for connection. "Adrian, please, you have to believe me. I trusted you to be smarter than them. I trusted you to survive." Adrian looked down at her hand gripping his leg. He reached down and took her wrist, removing her grip with a strength that was firm but not violent. He pulled her to her feet. He didn't let go of her wrist. He pulled her closer until they were chest to chest, just like in the safe house. But there was no heat now, only a terrible cold. "You trusted me to survive?" Adrian asked, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. "You gambled with my life? With the lives of my men? Because you thought I was invincible?" "I did it for my brother," Riley sobbed, looking into his unforgiving face. "What would you have done, Adrian? If it was your mother, if it was Marco? Tell me you wouldn't have burned the world down to save them. I would have died before I betrayed you," Adrian said. The truth of it struck Riley like a physical blow. She went limp in his grasp. Adrian stared at her, searching her face. He saw the bruises on her jaw where Victor's men had grabbed her. He saw the terror and the love warring in her eyes. He wanted to hate her. His code demanded it. She was a traitor. She was the reason he had just buried 4 of his people. But God help him. He couldn't do it, even now, with the smell of smoke still on his skin. He felt the pull of her gravity. He lifted his hand, his fingers rough against her chin, forcing her to look at him. "My mistake was not trusting you, Riley," he said, his voice cracking. "My mistake was falling in love with you. It made me blind. I didn't sweep the bridge because I was rushing to get back to the safe house. To you," Riley let out a broken sound. "No, I let my feelings rewrite my judgment," Adrian whispered, "and men died because of it." Riley couldn't stand the look in his eyes, the look of a man who had lost his faith. She surged forward, eliminating the space between them. She pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was a plea. It was a desperate apology poured into contact. Her hands came up to cup his face, avoiding the bandage, her thumbs stroking his cheekbones. She kissed him with everything she had left, begging him to feel the truth of her heart even if he couldn't forgive her actions. For a heartbeat, Adrian stood rigid. Then, with a groan of defeat, his resolve crumbled. His arms came around her, crushing her against him. He returned the kiss, not with anger, but with an aching softness that broke Riley's heart. He kissed her like he was saying goodbye. His hands moved over her back, memorizing the feel of her, his thumbs catching the tears that tracked down her face. It was a kiss of mourning for the life they could have had. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers for a fleeting second before he stepped away, putting 3 feet of cold air between them. His face was set in stone. The vulnerability was locked away behind the walls of the Costa Code. "I cannot kill you," Adrian said, his voice flat. My men expect it. The law demands it, but I cannot do it." Riley wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the chill. "But I cannot trust you," he continued. "You are a liability, Riley. You are a weakness I cannot afford. Not anymore." He walked to the heavy metal door and pounded on it twice. It opened instantly. Marco and 2 guards stepped in. "Take her to the secure room in the basement," Adrian ordered, refusing to look at Riley. "Lock her in. Guard the door. If she tries to leave, bind her." "Adrian!" Riley cried out as the guards moved toward her. "What about Noah? Victor still has him. He will kill him when he finds out I'm here." Adrian stopped. He turned his back to her, adjusting his cuffs with trembling hands. "I will get the boy," he said. Riley froze. You will?" "I promised you I would bring him home," Adrian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I do not break my promises, even to you." "But it's a trap," Riley shouted as the guards grabbed her arms. "You can't go there. Get her out of here," Adrian commanded. Riley was dragged backward, her heels skidding on the concrete. She watched Adrian standing alone in the center of the warehouse, a solitary figure amidst the shadows, until the door slammed shut, severing the connection. Left alone, Adrian walked to the table where he had laid out his weapons. He picked up a fresh magazine and slid it into his pistol with a mechanical click. Marco stepped back into the room, looking furious. "You are letting her live?" Marco asked, incredulous. "Boss, she got Tony and Mick killed." "I know," Adrian said quietly. "And now you are going to go after her brother?" Marco threw his hands up. "This is suicide. Adrian, it is against the code. You do not clean up a traitor's mess. You do not risk the family for an outsider." Adrian looked up. His eyes were hard, but there was a strange, terrible light in them. "The code is already broken. Marco, I broke it the moment I let her live the first time." He pulled on a fresh Kevlar vest, strapping it tight over his ribs. "I am going to get the boy," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "And then I am going to find Victor Hale, and I am going to tear his empire down brick by brick. Not for business, not for territory." He racked the slide of his gun. For her. Marco stared at him for a long moment, seeing the change in his leader. This wasn't the disciplined architect of order anymore. This was a man with nothing left to lose. Marco sighed, drawing his own weapon. "Then I guess we are going to need more ammo." 2 hours later, the night exploded. Adrian did not use strategy. He did not use politics. He used blunt force trauma. He liquidated favors he had held for a decade. He called in debts from corrupt SWAT captains and Port Authority officers. He exposed the location of 3 of his own safe houses to the police to create a diversion across town. He led the strike team personally. They hit the Iron Bridge warehouse, where Noah was being held like the wrath of God. They breached the front gate with an armored truck. They swept through the hallways with a violence that shocked even the Iron Bridge hardened veterans. Adrian moved through the smoke and the gunfire like a phantom, shooting with a precision that bordered on supernatural. He took a bullet to the shoulder, the impact spinning him around, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Every room he cleared, every enemy he dropped, was a payment on the debt he felt he owed. He was burning his own syndicate to the ground, exposing his operations, reckless with his own life, all to save the brother of the woman who had betrayed him. He kicked open the door to the holding cell. Noah was there, tied to a chair, barely conscious. He looked up, eyes wide with terror as the bloodied figure of Adrian Costa filled the doorway. "Can you walk?" Adrian demanded, holstering his weapon and drawing a knife to cut the bonds. Noah nodded mutely, too scared to speak. Adrian sliced the ropes and hauled the boy to his feet. "Run," Adrian ordered, shoving him toward Marco, who waited in the hall. "Get him to the extraction point." "What about you?" Marco yelled over the sound of approaching sirens. Adrian turned back toward the interior of the warehouse, reloading his weapon. "Victor is still here," Adrian said. He walked back into the smoke, leaving safety behind, walking toward the final circle of hell he had created for himself. He had saved the boy. Now, he had a war to finish. The raid on the Iron Bridge warehouse was a chaotic, violent symphony of shattering glass and shouting men. But for Adrian Costa, the world had narrowed down to a single room. He stood in the center of the holding cell, his chest heaving, his shoulder throbbing where a bullet had grazed him earlier. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and old fear. In the corner, curled into a ball on a filthy mattress, was Noah. The boy, 19 years old, but looking far younger in his terror, was alive. He was bruised, his face swollen, his wrists raw from rope burns. The sight of him, broken but breathing, sent a jolt of cold fury through Adrian that was sharper than any knife. This was the cost of the life he led. This was the collateral damage of his empire. "We are leaving," Adrian said, his voice rough. He helped Noah to his feet. The boy flinched at the touch, his eyes wide and unseeing. But when he recognized the authority in Adrian's voice, he slumped against him, too weak to walk on his own. Adrian took the boy's weight without complaint, draping Noah's arm over his uninjured shoulder. They moved through the smoke-filled corridors, stepping over debris, past the remnants of the Iron Bridge crew that had tried to stop them. Marco met them at the extraction point, his face grim. "He is in bad shape." "Boss," Marco noted, looking at Noah. "He is alive," Adrian corrected. "Get the car. We are going back to the safe house." The drive back was silent. Adrian sat in the back with Noah, keeping a hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding him. He wasn't doing it for the boy. He was doing it for her. Every mile that passed brought him closer to the moment he would have to face Riley again, the woman who had betrayed him to save this shivering kid next to him. When they arrived at the safe house, Adrian ordered his men to hang back. He supported Noah down the hallway himself. He stopped in front of the heavy steel door where Riley was being held. He nodded to the guard, who unlocked it with a heavy clank. The door swung open. Riley was pacing the small room, her hands tangled in her hair, her face a mask of pure agony. She spun around as the light from the hallway flooded in. For a second, she didn't move. She stared at the two figures in the doorway, the bloodied, imposing silhouette of the Mafia boss and the slumped form beside him. "Noah," she whispered, the name barely a breath. Noah lifted his head. "Riley, the dam broke." Riley rushed forward, a sob tearing from her throat. She nearly knocked them both over as she wrapped her arms around her brother, burying her face in his neck, clutching him as if she were trying to fuse their bones together. Noah collapsed into her, weeping openly, the tension of the last week finally snapping. Adrian stepped back, letting them have the moment. He leaned against the doorframe, watching. His face was stoic, the mask of the dawn firmly in place, but his eyes told a different story. He watched Riley's hand stroking her brother's hair. He heard the frantic, hushed words of comfort she was pouring into his ear, and he felt a phantom ache in his chest. He had broken his code. He had cleaned up a traitor's mess, and looking at the raw, fierce love radiating from Riley, he knew he would do it again. After a long time. Riley looked up. Her face was wet with tears, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at Adrian standing in the shadows. You brought him back, she said, her voice trembling. I keep my promises, Adrian replied quietly. 2 hours later, Noah was sedated and sleeping in a secure bedroom, a doctor on Adrian's payroll watching over him. Adrian sat at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey open in front of him, cleaning his gun. Riley walked in. She had washed her face, but she looked exhausted. She hesitated at the doorway, then walked over and sat opposite him. Thank you, she said. There are no words. Thank you. Adrian didn't look up from the weapon. He slid the barrel back into place with a metallic click. Do not thank me yet, he said. It is not over. Riley frowned. What do you mean? You got Noah. We can disappear. I will take him and go. You will never see us again. No, Adrian said. He finally looked at her. The darkness in his eyes was absolute. Victor knows you are alive. He knows I hid his warehouse. If you run, he will hunt you down. He will not stop until he has made an example of you. Then what do we do? Riley asked, fear creeping back into her voice. We finish it, Adrian said. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I have made a deal, he said. Not with a cartel, with the feds. Riley's jaw dropped. You talked to the FBI? I gave them a folder. Adrian said, it contains locations, bank accounts, names of corrupt judges, routes, everything they need to dismantle the Iron Bridge cartel. And, Riley asked, sensing the other shoe was about to drop, and the Costa Syndicate, Adrian added. Riley stood up, knocking her chair back. You gave them your own people? Adrian, why? Because it is the only way to clean the slate. Adrian turned to face her, his expression fierce. If I just take out Victor, another shark swims in to take his place. My own captains will fight for the territory. The war never ends. Riley, unless I burn the board. He walked over to her, his intensity pinning her in place. I set a trap. Tomorrow night. I invited Victor to the old freight yard. I told him I am surrendering. I told him I am ready to hand over my territory in exchange for safe passage. He will come. He's too arrogant to refuse a victory lap. And when he gets there, we end him, Adrian said. And then the police sweep in and take whatever is left. Riley stared at him. You are going to prison. It is better than a coffin, Adrian said with a shrug. And it buys you freedom. Real freedom, not looking over your shoulder? I am coming with you, Riley said instantly. No. Adrian shook his head. You stay with Noah. When the shooting starts, I am not staying behind. Riley cut him off, stepping closer, grabbing the lapels of his ruined shirt. You are walking into a war zone alone? You think I'm going to let you die for me while I sit here safe? I cannot protect you out there, Adrian shouted, his control fraying. I don't need you to protect me, Riley shouted back. I need you to fight with me. I am a sniper, Adrian. I am the best shot you have. If Victor brings his heavy hitters, you will need someone to clear the field. They glared at each other, the air between them electric with the same stubborn fire that had drawn them together in the first place. Adrian looked at her hands gripping his shirt, at the set of her jaw. He realized then that he couldn't stop her. She wasn't a damsel he had rescued. She was a warrior he had partnered with. Fine, Adrian breathed, covering her hands with his own. But you stay close. You do not leave my sight. I stay close, Riley promised. The freight yard was a graveyard of rusted metal. Fog rolled in off the harbor, swirling around the stacked shipping containers and the skeletal remains of old cranes. It was quiet, the kind of heavy, unnatural silence that precedes a storm. Adrian and Riley positioned themselves behind a wall of concrete barriers near the center of the yard. Adrian had stripped down his crew to only the most loyal men, Marco and 2 others. He had sent the rest away, unwilling to let them die for a syndicate that would cease to exist by sunrise. Riley checked her weapon. She had traded her small pistol for a tactical rifle Adrian had provided. She looked comfortable with it, the stock tucked against her shoulder, her breathing steady. Here they come, Marco whispered into his headset. Headlights cut through the fog. A convoy of black SUVs rolled into the yard, engines growling low. They fanned out, forming a semicircle. Victor Hale stepped out of the lead vehicle. He looked triumphant. He wore a long coat and a smile that looked like a jagged wound. He was flanked by at least 20 men, all heavily armed. "Adrian," Victor called out, his voice echoing off the metal containers. "Come out, little king. Let us discuss the terms of your surrender." Adrian looked at Riley. He reached out and squeezed her hand. A brief, crushing pressure. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she whispered. Adrian stepped out from behind the barrier, hands raised, walking into the open space lit by Victor's headlights. "I am here, Victor," Adrian said, his voice calm and carrying. Victor laughed. "Look at you, the great Adrian Costa, alone, broken. Where is your army? I don't need an army to deal with trash," Adrian said. Victor's smile vanished. "Kill him." The command was the spark. As Victor's men raised their weapons, Riley rose from her cover. The crack of her rifle split the night. The man closest to Victor dropped, his weapon clattering to the ground. It began. Adrian dove for cover behind a stack of pallets as bullets chewed up the ground where he had been standing. He came up firing, his handgun barking a deadly rhythm. Riley was a machine. She moved with fluid precision, popping up to take a shot, dropping back down before the return fire could find her. She picked off the shooters on the periphery, clearing the way for Adrian to advance. Adrian moved through the chaos like a wraith. He flanked the Iron Bridge line, using the shipping containers as a maze. He and Riley fought back to back, separated by distance but connected by a lethal rhythm. When she reloaded, he provided suppressive fire. When he moved, she covered his blind spots. It was a dance of violence, perfectly synchronized. But Victor had the numbers. His men were pushing forward, pinning Adrian and Riley down. "We are getting flanked," Riley shouted over the roar of gunfire. "Two coming around the left side." Adrian spun, taking out one, but his slide locked back. Empty. Victor saw the opening. He emerged from behind an SUV, manic and desperate, realizing his men were dropping too fast. He saw Riley's position. He saw her reloading. "You first, bitch!" Victor screamed. He raised a heavy assault rifle, aiming directly at Riley's chest. Adrian saw it. He was 20 feet away. He had no ammo. He was safe behind a steel beam. His code, the code that had kept him alive for 20 years, screamed at him to stay down. Self-preservation was the first rule. Survival was the only victory. But he looked at Riley. He saw the woman who had hesitated to kill him, the woman who had wept for her brother, the woman who made him feel human. The code shattered. Adrian launched himself from cover. He didn't think. He just moved. He sprinted across the open ground, a blur of dark motion. Victor pulled the trigger. Adrian threw his body in front of Riley just as the gun flashed. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, the impact spinning him around like a rag doll. It felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. "Adrian!" Riley screamed, the sound tearing through her throat. Adrian didn't fall. He used the momentum of the impact to tackle Victor. They crashed to the ground, a tangle of limbs and rage. Adrian ignored the agony in his shoulder. He smashed his fist into Victor's face. Once. Twice. 3 times. He wrenched the rifle from Victor's grip and tossed it aside. Victor lay broken on the wet asphalt, wheezing, blood bubbling from his lips. Adrian stood up, swaying. His vision swam. He pressed a hand to his shoulder, feeling the warm flow of blood. "It is over," Adrian rasped. Suddenly, the yard was flooded with blinding white light. Sirens wailed from every direction, piercing the night. "Federal agents, drop your weapons, get on the ground!" The cavalry had arrived. The trap had sprung. Iron Bridge men were throwing down their guns, surrendering to the swarm of armored officers pouring into the yard. Riley scrambled to her feet and rushed to Adrian. She grabbed him, her hands frantically checking his wound. "You are shot," she cried, tears mixing with the grime on her face. "You idiot! You took the bullet. Why did you do that?" Adrian looked down at her. The pain was blinding, but he felt strangely light, because the code was wrong. He whispered, "Riley, get down!" A police officer shouted, aiming a rifle at them. Adrian stepped back, pushing Riley gently away. He raised his good hand, the other hanging uselessly at his side. He tossed his empty gun onto the ground. "Adrian, no!" Riley begged, clutching at his arm. "Don't give yourself up. We can run. In the confusion, we can run." Adrian shook his head. He looked at her with a tenderness that stopped her heart. "If I run, I am still the boss," he said. "I am still the man who kills. This is the only way to break the cycle. Riley." He cupped her face with his bloodied hand. His thumb brushed her lower lip, smearing a trace of red on her skin. "I have to pay for the life I lived," he told her softly. "But you and Noah are free. That is what I bought with this." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. The chaos of the sirens and the shouting faded into the background. "Loving you made me see," Adrian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "There is something worth losing everything for." He pulled away. He turned toward the approaching officers and dropped to his knees, his hands behind his head. Riley stood there, sobbing, watching as they cuffed him, as they led him away. He looked back over his shoulder once. He didn't smile, he just nodded, a silent promise that this wasn't the end. The seasons changed. The gray rain of Harborview turned to the crisp gold of autumn, then the white silence of winter, and finally, the tentative green of spring. 18 months later. The federal facility was a gray block of concrete surrounded by fences, sitting in the middle of a flat, empty landscape. The sun was shining, a bright, unapologetic yellow that made the gravel sparkle. A car was parked by the gate, a sensible, mid-range sedan. Leaning against the hood was Riley. She looked different. The haunted look was gone from her eyes. Her hair was longer, tied back in a loose ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple white t-shirt. She looked like a woman who slept at night. Inside the car, Noah sat in the passenger seat, scrolling on his phone. He looked healthy, the bruises long faded, the trauma slowly healing with therapy and time. The heavy metal gate buzzed and began to slide open. Riley straightened up. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a rhythm she hadn't felt in a year and a half. A figure walked out. Adrian Costa wore simple clothes, jeans and a gray jacket. He looked thinner. The sharp, expensive suits were gone. The aura of terrifying power was gone, but the strength was still there in the set of his shoulders. He stopped just outside the gate. He squinted against the sun, taking a deep breath of free air. Then he saw her. He went still. He stared at her as if she were a mirage. He had spent 500 nights staring at the ceiling of his cell, terrified that when he walked out, she wouldn't be there, that she would have moved on, that she would have realized a life with an ex-con wasn't what she wanted. Riley pushed off the car. She took a step, then another, then she was running. Adrian dropped the small bag he was carrying. He braced himself just as she collided with him. He buried his face in her neck, wrapping his arms around her waist, lifting her off the ground. She clung to him, her legs wrapping around his waist, her face buried in the crook of his shoulder. "You waited," he choked out, his voice rough with disuse. "I told you," she sobbed, laughing through her tears. "I stay close." He set her down, but didn't let go. He pulled back to look at her. He traced the line of her face, seeing the peace there. Noah honked the horn. He stuck his head out the window, grinning. "Get a room, you two." Adrian laughed. It was a rusty sound, but real. When he looked at Riley, his eyes clear, the golden flecks shining bright, he leaned in. There were no walls, no shadows, no guns hidden under coats, just the sun and the woman he loved. He kissed her. It was a long, slow kiss, tasting of freedom and promise. It was the seal on a new contract, one not written in blood, but in the messy, fragile, fierce hope of a future they would build together. "Ready to go?" Riley asked, breathless, resting her forehead against his. Adrian looked back at the prison, then at the open road ahead. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home. Thank you so much for listening to The Mafia Boss Broke His Own Code. I hope you enjoyed Adrian and Riley's journey from enemies to lovers. Writing their story was an emotional ride, and I'm thrilled I could share it with you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where in the world you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this series, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more passionate, realistic, and thrilling tales. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. Thank you for your support.